Go ahead and open in your Bibles to Acts chapter 27. Acts chapter 27, as we are nearing the end. Paul is nearing the end of his voyage as recorded in the book of Acts, and so we are nearing the end as well. Chapter 27, starting in verse 39. Where is verse 39? When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach onto which they planned to run the ship, if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow struck fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. Now when they had escaped, they then found out that the island was called Malta. And the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and made us all welcome, because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. So when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow to live." But he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. However, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked and for a long time saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. In that region there was an estate of the leading citizen of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. And it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. Paul went in to him and prayed, and he laid his hands on him and healed him. And so when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. They also honored us in many ways, and when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. And so here we have the shipwreck of Paul. Just to recap what's brought us to this point, remember Paul, whenever he was in Jerusalem, he was falsely accused of defiling the temple. The Jews wanted him dead, but the Romans kind of got him away from the mob. And the Jews were accusing him and wanting him executed, but the Romans couldn't actually find any law that he had broken. They didn't know what to do with him, so they just kind of kept him in prison to appease the Jews. And he was in prison for several years. Finally, after multiple trials, he appealed to Caesar, which was his right as a Roman citizen, that he would be sent to Rome, where the emperor would hear his case. So he was sent off by Governor Festus, given into the care of a centurion named Julius and his soldiers. And so they got on a boat and they were headed, and they ended up with a bit of a dangerous voyage where the winds were not favorable. They got blown off course. They spent 2 weeks in open sea, fearing that they would all die. But God appeared to Paul and told him that, no, you will live and everyone on the boat, but the ship will be lost, but everyone will survive. And so that is where we pick up in verse 39. So let's just go through this little part of the passage verse by verse and see what fun things are in there for us to learn. Verse 39. So when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. So they did everything they could to just set the ship free and let the wind drive it as fast as it could go, with the idea of running it up on to that beach. Verse 41, But striking a place where two seas met, that's just describing that there was some kind of sandbar where the two waters around the island from each side kind of shaped something that, was under the water they couldn't see, but the boat ran into it. They ran the ship aground, and the prow struck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. So the ship gets lodged, and the front is stuck, but from behind the waves are just beating it and starting to break it into pieces. And so the soldiers think, oh no, if the prisoners run away, we're in trouble, because an escaped prisoner likely meant death for the soldier. So the soldiers were like, hey, you know what? I'm not giving my life for this. Let's just kill the prisoners so they don't escape. Which, I guess, if you are a wicked, twisted pagan, would make sense. Verse 33, but the centurion, wanting to spare Paul. I love that through this whole thing, from day one, the centurion, the Roman soldier, Julius, who is in charge, has kind of had a liking to Paul. He favors him. I don't know if he knew him from in Caesarea or if there was just something about Paul on the voyage, but he has played very favorable to Paul and his folks along with him. So wanting to save Paul, he kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. That makes sense. The soldiers who know how to swim, go ahead and get them on the shore so any prisoners who do try to escape, they can round them up. And the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship, and so it was that they all escaped safely to land. Everyone has survived, just as God told them it would happen, that the ship would be lost, but not a single person on the ship would be lost. They all survived, but they lost everything. What's interesting is, remember earlier on in the trip, whenever Paul was telling them, hey, this is dangerous, we need to just stay where we are, but the owner of the ship said, no, let's go, we can make it, right? He's wanting to get his cargo to market, and now here he is, he lost everything. But he did survive, and so there is that. On to verse 28, or chapter 28, verse 1. Now when they had escaped, they then found out that the island was called Malta. So occasionally people will come across things that they'll learn something and they'll say, my pastor never told me about that. Well, okay, let this be one of those things that you get told about. It's not a big deal, but some people think it's a big deal and they go, oh no, the Bible's wrong. It wasn't Malta. Historians, scholars actually disagree on what the island is. In the Greek, it doesn't actually say Malta, it says Melita, which once upon a time, kind of through translation ways that people talked, could have been attributed to the island of Malta. But there's also some other islands that scholars say it may have been referring to. Notably, there's an island called Millet, which is along the coast of Croatia. And then there's another island that's kind of gained in some notoriety for this called Kefalonia, which is off the coast of Greece, both of which were historically referred to by this name of Melita, which is what is actually in the Greek. And so it could have been referring to them. They kind of seem to have similar, maybe geographic things that would match the location. So it's one of those situations where scholars don't actually all agree. But tradition and most scholars say that it is Malta. So if someday you discover that it actually isn't Malta, okay, the English translation says Malta, but it doesn't actually necessarily have to be that island. Scholars could have been mistaken, and it was describing some other island by a similar name. And so no need to have your faith rocked by something like that. Those skeptics love to grab onto that kind of thing and claim the Bible's an error. It's actually not an error. It's a fun research project for those who like to nerd out on those kind of things about the Bible. You can go look into that, about where did Paul's shipwreck actually take place. It's really fun. Whenever I was preparing for this sermon, I spent way too much time running down that whenever I actually never intended to present any of the details. But it's a fun thing to look into. Either way, they are over 200 miles off course that they went through storm, through open sea and high waves and rain. So no matter what island they're actually shipwrecking on, it was the grace of God and the hand of God's providence that brought them to where they are. And so praise God for that. Verse 2, then the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. Remember, it's still wintertime. This is the season that it is cold and rainy, and so being shipwrecked, being soaked wet, cold, and it's raining, so you're not getting dry. Nice of the natives of the island to bring them fire and help them get warm. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them in the fire, a viper came out of the heat and fastened onto his hand. And so when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow to live. So the ancient pagans of that time, they had a view that was very fatalistic, yet they kind of figured that the scales would be balanced and justice would be served no matter what. They were really big into superstition, signs and omens and that sort of thing. And so the idea that a snake would just kind of jump out and bite him, they're thinking, ooh, this must be a sign that there's something evil about him. This is justice catching up to him. It's really interesting because they were also really fatalistic. In Greek mythology, you have everything's just kind of laid out. Like it's going to happen the way it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. Think of the story of Oedipus, right? A king has a prophecy foretold that his son would kill him, so whenever his wife bears a child and it's a boy, he tells one of his servants to go kill the kid, but the servant doesn't kill the kid, instead carries him off to a faraway kingdom. But then as he grows up thinking he's from that kingdom, then he comes back over and ends up, killing his dad. So through trying to avoid the prophecy was fulfilled. That's very Greek. That's very much the way they thought, that there is no escaping your fate. If it is your fate, that's what it's going to be. And so they're thinking, he got bit by a snake. It's going to kill him. He cannot escape his fate. This is justice being served because he must be some murderer or something of that sort. And so that's the way they thought. That's not what the Bible teaches. And so that's not how we view those things. Verse 5. But he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. However, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked a long time and saw no harm come to him, so they're looking, they're waiting, they're expecting, here it comes, any moment, going to drop dead, and then he doesn't. Interesting note, and we're not talking about the Gospel of Mark. However, this is relevant. As you probably know, we've mentioned it before multiple times, that at the end of the Gospel of Mark, like the last, I think it's 11 verses, are not in the earliest original manuscripts that we have. It appears that those last few verses in what is in your English Bible, the Gospel of Mark, were added later. But it tends to not be an issue because they're all true. And so people think that maybe some, scribe thought, hey, this ends rather abruptly, let's put a better ending on it. Some think that there's these documents called lectionaries. It's what they would read from in churches. And it would have the verses in the passage, and then it would have kind of, theological notes to go along with it. And that maybe in copying, from a lectionary, this part got stuck in when it wasn't really supposed to be part of the actual text. However it got there, it is widely understood by virtually everyone that the last, almost dozen verses of the Gospel of Mark were not originally written by Mark. But every one of them actually appears somewhere else in the New Testament in the teachings of the Bible. Among it is this list of things that says that those who follow Jesus, these signs shall occur. And it lists off, things like speaking in tongues. Yeah, they did that at Pentecost. Things like raising the dead. Yeah, Peter and Paul did that too. One of the things it mentions is that they could be bitten by snakes and not die. Well, that's it right here. That's Paul being bitten by a snake and not dying. And so that's just another little side things that if people try to say, aha, that, the ending of Mark, that wasn't in there. You can't trust the Bible. Well, even if those verses were added later, everything they say, other places in the Bible do corroborate that it is indeed true. For instance, Paul's bitten by a snake and he doesn't die. So anyway, that's from Mark. That's free of charge. That's nothing to do with Acts. But after they looked for a long time, and they saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. These people are kind of fickle. They go from, oh, he must be a murderer, to, no, he's a god. Which isn't the first time we've seen something like that. Back in Acts chapter 14, whenever they're in Lystra, Paul and Silas, I believe it was, right? They heal a man and the crowd goes, ooh, they must be gods. And then whenever they're trying to tell them to be quiet and everything else, and the crowd turns and goes, oh no, they're blasphemers, put them to death. That's kind of quick. And if you remember, even Jesus, right? At the triumphal entry, Hosanna, Hosanna, all glory to the Son of David, hailing him as King and Messiah. And then a few days later, calling for his crucifixion. People tend to be kind of fickle, kind of easily swayed with stuff. You ever notice that? Here's the thing. Most people are not driven by reason. Most of us aren't. God has wired us that we can kind of just develop a way to go through life so we're not having to be completely frozen, not able to do anything because we're having to sit and think about every single little detail of every little decision of everything we have to do all day, every day. We kind of just build in a filter in a way that we just go through life. And that's great. That's good. But then you can fall onto that reliance and it leads you into false things. It's one thing I had to learn with dealing with skeptics. Sometimes people seem like they're being deceptive, like they're being dishonest, because no matter what you say, no matter what you answer, no matter what you point to in Scripture, they always have some other question, some new excuse. It doesn't matter. They're just jumping from issue to issue, almost like they're not interested in the truth. It could be. Or it could be that they're not actually engaging their thinking, but their filter that they have just automatically says, that can't be true, so I have to come up with something. And then that's what's happening with these people. Ooh, snake bit him. Their filter says, murderer, sinner, horrible person, justice is out to get him. Ooh, he didn't die from the snake. He must be a god. And that's just their filter. That's just how they go. And we do the same things. People who were just kind of left on autopilot for whatever ideas, worldview filters they already have, that's what it is, no matter how much you try to show them the truth if they're not willing to engage. It's like wearing colored glasses. If you have on red glasses and I'm trying to show you something that's yellow, what color are you seeing? You're seeing red. It doesn't matter how much I try to convince you and tell you about the yellow. You're never going to see the yellow until you take off your red glasses. And if people aren't willing to engage their minds and actually think about things, they're just seeing through their worldview glasses. And that's what these people are doing. And so it can seem like they're really fickle, like they're really being dishonest or in some way, or maybe they're just not actually thinking and they're just going through whatever their filters tell them. Verse 7. In that region was an estate of the leading citizen of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. And it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. Paul went into him and prayed, and he laid his hands on him and healed him. By the way, aside from like Oregon Trail and never making it to Oregon because I kept dying of dysentery, I never really had any idea what dysentery really was. I recently listened to a podcast about World War I and the conditions in the trenches, and I will not give details, but I learned in quite gruesome detail what dysentery is and exactly how horrific of a death that could be. So what this guy was going through was very much not fun. So Paul comes along and heals him. That's free of charge. Verse 9. So when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. They also honored us in many ways, and when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. You remember in the Bible that miracles don't just happen just for the sake of the miracle. It's not merely that God has compassion on someone, that he allows them to be healed, but miracles confirm the message, right? Whenever Moses shows up and he has, he's going to deliver the law and establish the nation of Israel, miracles abound, right? Whenever the prophets come on the scene to declare to the people of Israel that they're not following God and that they're supposed to do something new, they perform miracles. Whenever you have Jesus and the apostles, they come and they're performing miracles. Miracles confirm the message. They let you know this person actually is from God because he's showing the power of God. And knowing Paul, even though we're not told that he was preaching and teaching, it's Paul. He's on an island, surrounded by people who don't know Jesus. What do you think he's doing? He's proclaiming the gospel. He's telling them about Jesus. And in the midst of all that, miracles are also being performed. Okay. So what can we learn from this passage that helps us as we try to share the gospel, right? We're reading through the book of Acts, and as much fun as it is just to learn the history, we're having an eye towards how we can fulfill the Great Commission to go and make disciples. What do we learn from the apostles here in the book of Acts? And I think a key thing in this passage that we can learn is there in verse 9, right? The magistrate's dad is sick, he's suffering, he's dying. Paul comes and heals him, and then we're told this. When this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. Because they saw there's healing to be had over there. Let's go get that healing. They were drawn to the power of God at work. And I think that's something that we can learn to keep in mind, that people are drawn to the power of God at work in someone's life. The sad thing is, and I never quite understood this, I wasn't taught this growing up, so I actually had really fun and sometimes offensive conversations with people, but our society seems to have taught multiple generations that in polite society, you're not supposed to talk about religion or politics. I never understood that because why not? Those are fun and they're important. We should talk about them. But somehow we have been told that you are supposed to be quiet and keep to yourself your thoughts about some of the most important things in life. How does that make any sense? I think that's one of those lies that the devil kind of snuck in there that it sounds so pious and nice. But here's the thing. In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, what did Jesus say to the apostles? He told them, "You shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." Witnesses testify about what they personally have seen and know. And they knew Jesus. They saw Jesus. And he said, "Go tell them what you have seen and what you know about me." We knew Jesus. We've seen Jesus working in our lives and the lives of people around us. So we kind of have to ask ourselves, if the command to the followers of Christ are to be his witnesses to the world, what have you seen and heard about Christ? What do you know about Jesus? What has Jesus done in your life? Because we all got something. I mean, you're sitting here in church. You know Jesus. So you have something that you have witnessed of Christ. You have something that you can testify to about Christ. And the world, despite what culture wants to say about being polite, the world is desperate for the healing that only Christ can bring. They need the same grace, the same forgiveness, the meaning, the purpose that you have in your life that Christ has given to you. Their hearts need him. They need the healing power that only he can bring. And for whatever reason, we bought the lie that, oh, no, it's not polite to talk about those things. It has nothing to do with being polite or civil. The fact is, they need it, and we have it. Imagine if Paul had not healed Publius's dad. Imagine if he had said, well, I want to kind of keep that to myself. Or if he healed him and said, don't tell anybody about what I did. And just kind of kept that secret. And word hadn't gotten out to all the other sick people on the island that there is healing to be had over here. You have all those people suffering, painful illness and death. But that's not what happened. Christ's power was shown, and the people who needed Christ said, yes, I want that. Bring it to me. How many people are there around us every day who need the healing power of Christ? Maybe not for physical healing, but we all have illnesses of the heart, of the soul, of the spirit, our sin that we need healed from, that we need set free from. They have it too. How many people are around us every day that if they knew, if they could hear the witness of the healing Christ has brought in our lives, if they could hear of the purpose, the meaning that we have found, the grace, the forgiveness that we so desperately needed, they need it too. And if they only knew that there was somewhere they could find it, that his name is Jesus Christ. How many people are around you in need of Christ's healing, but have no idea that someone who can point them to that healing is sitting right next to them? We have what the world needs. Let's be open about it. Be a witness for Christ, for what he has done in your life. Let them know the healing power that they need is available for all who would come and trust in him.
That little church on Liberty Hill, come praise the Lord, let your cup be filled. Raise your voices and we'll sing, let God's freedom ring from that little church on Liberty.